The black Warsaw night in December bit into the skin with a chattering cold, the bone-deep chill seeping into every closed crevice of the National Forensic Institute. Frost laced the morgue window panes, an ethereal veil like a white shroud of mourning. I am Merrick, a green medical intern, my high cheekbones flushed red from the cold. I hesitantly pushed open the squealing steel door of the morgue, stepping into my first night shift. The door slammed shut behind me with a heavy thud, like a coffin lid sealing or someone's chest collapsing. The air that hit me was sterile and cold, the silence tomb-like. Fluorescent lights on the ceiling flickered erratically, casting a sickly green glow on the stark white-tiled floor, stained with blotches of dried blood. The pungent smell of disinfectant assaulted my nostrils, mingling with the gruesome metallic tang of death, haunting my sense of smell and triggering a wave of nausea. My footsteps echoed lonely in the deathly silence, like a lost soul's call in the underworld. Rows of stainless steel body lockers stood before me, stretching into an endless line like nameless graves, cold and soulless. I scanned each row, mentally numbering them from 1 to 30. Reaching the third row, my gaze snagged as if held by an invisible force. Locker number 7. This one was completely different from the other gleaming units. It was old, rusted, its wooden door warped and riddled with cracks like a spiderweb. Its appearance was disturbingly ominous, a dark blemish in the sterile environment. A sudden wave of icy air emanated from locker number 7, washing over my face, chilling me to the very marrow, making me shiver uncontrollably like a sparrow caught in a storm. A creeping dread invaded my mind. I felt an unsettling wrongness about this locker, a strange, dark energy radiating from its decaying exterior, creating an intense feeling of unease and foreboding. I tried to ignore it, burying myself in checking medical instruments, avoiding the haunting gaze of locker 7, but my eyes were involuntarily drawn back to that eerie, shadowy corner beyond my control. Suddenly, a strange noise echoed from the direction of locker number 7. I couldn't quite place the sound, but it was enough to make my heart leap and my chest tighten. I strained to listen, the morgue enveloped in a silence that swallowed all sound, leaving only the fierce whistling of the wind outside the windows and the frantic thumping of my own heart echoing in my head. "It's just a rat," I reassured myself, my voice trembling, but cold sweat had already broken out on my forehead, soaking my hair. As the night deepened, the darkness in the morgue grew thicker and more viscous, as if it were crawling from the hidden corners, devouring the light and claiming the space. Soft, unseen footsteps echoed behind me, even though I knew I was completely alone. A prickling sensation ran down my spine. Someone or something was watching me from behind that sinister locker number 7, an invisible gaze as cold as a blade, piercing through my skin and reaching my very bones. I began to feel short of breath, my chest constricted as if squeezed by an unseen hand, my windpipe choked. Horrifying images of corpses, blood, and entrails flashed in my mind, besieging my thoughts and threatening my fragile sanity. Fear surged like a tidal wave, engulfing my reason and crushing my courage. But despite the overwhelming terror, I gritted my teeth and bravely moved towards locker number 7, my steps heavy as if weighted with stones. I was determined to find out what was so special about this locker, the source of that bizarre, dark energy, and to conquer the fear within me. As I approached locker number 7, the scent of withered white lilies suddenly became overpowering, thick and suffocating, as if it were pouring out from within the decaying wooden locker, engulfing the space, haunting my sense of smell, and causing an intense feeling of coldness, sickness, and utter discomfort. The fragrance was sweet and alluring, but beneath it lay the stench of decay, death, and putrefaction, utterly repulsive. Even in the dim light, I could clearly see the cracks on the locker door trembling slightly, rustling, as if something were writhing frantically inside, desperate to break free, to tear apart its chains. My hand, clammy with sweat, trembled as I placed it on the cold, rough surface of the locker door, which felt like snakeskin. My fingers shook as they touched the decaying wood, the sensation akin to touching the rotting flesh of a corpse. Before my eyes, the locker door creaked open a sliver, a horrifying sound like a groan from the underworld. An endless, inky blackness poured out from the gap like spilled tar, engulfing me, swallowing the light, trapping me in hopeless darkness. And from that terrifying darkness, a skeletal, ice-cold hand emerged, suddenly seizing my arm, gripping it tightly, squeezing, crushing, holding fast, refusing to let go, as if the dark soul of locker number 7 had awakened, materialized, seeking revenge, devouring everything. The curse of locker number 7, haunting, chilling, terrifying. I screamed hoarsely, yelling wildly, thrashing desperately, writhing like a fish out of water, but the invisible skeletal hand tightened its grip even more, like a vice-crushing bone, my skin and flesh feeling as if they were being torn apart, the pain piercing my heart. Suddenly, the fluorescent lights in the morgue flickered back on, blindingly bright, banishing the dark night. The grotesque skeletal hand vanished without a trace, as if it had never existed. I collapsed onto the cold tiled floor, gasping for breath, my heart pounding erratically like a frantic drum, utterly panicked, my face ashen white. Locker number 7 remained silent in the shadowy corner, its wooden door slightly ajar, its exterior lifeless and inert, as if the horrifying event that had just occurred was merely an illusion, a long, chilling dream. But it was no illusion. On my arm, where the ghostly hand had just gripped me, a red, bruised handprint, a deep, horrifying indentation, was clearly visible, like the indelible mark of a curse, forever imprinted on my poor body and soul. The morgue continued to be shrouded in deathly silence, concealing untold horrifying secrets, awaiting its next victims to fall into its demonic trap. The story had only just begun. It was about 14 years ago. I was working the night shift at the morgue of St. Ethelred's Hospital, a decrepit building located on the edge of town, a place people only came to when life had departed. The biting cold of the late-night wind swept through the long, desolate corridors, carrying the scent of mildew and the mustiness of ages. The light from the flickering fluorescent bulbs cast grotesque shadows on the walls, like souls lingering, seeking escape from the earthly plane. My footsteps echoed on the cold, tiled floor. The strong smell of disinfectant mingled with a subtle, putrid scent, a grim reminder of decomposing bodies. I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the unease that was rising within me. The cold room came into view, a dark, frigid space, where metal drawers were stacked upon each other like anonymous coffins. The air was stagnant, heavy with an unseen dread. My gaze inadvertently fell upon a corner of the room, where a weathered wooden cabinet stood, marked by the passage of time. Unlike the other inanimate objects, this cabinet possessed a strange allure. The carvings on its doors were faded, but upon closer inspection, they seemed like contorted faces and silent screams. A cold draft seeped from the cabinet's cracks, causing me to shiver involuntarily. I approached it, my heart beating faster. A growing sense of unease intensified as I discovered an old journal tucked away inside. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded and smudged, yet I could still make out a few disjointed lines. "Don't open it. Don't let it out. It's waiting." Suddenly, a sound echoed from the corner of the room. The chilling sound of metal striking metal, like a knock from beyond the grave. I spun around, startled, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was no one, only the cold, silent drawers. The atmosphere suddenly felt heavy, as if an unseen pair of eyes were watching me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but just then, a freezing breath touched the nape of my neck. I whirled around, nothing but pitch-black darkness. In the nights that followed, I began to have nightmares. In my dreams, I saw myself trapped inside the wooden cabinet. Ghastly white hands emerged from every direction, clawing at my skin. I thrashed and screamed, but no one could hear me. When I woke up, my body would be drenched in sweat, and bloody scratches would appear on my wrists. Every night, I would see a dark shadow flickering in the corner of the morgue, and hear faint, murmuring whispers in my ear, like an eternal curse. Then that fateful night arrived. I could no longer resist the urge of curiosity. I placed my hand on the cabinet's handle and slowly pulled it open. The moment the creaking door swung slightly ajar, a jet of pitch-black air shot out, swirling around me like 1,000 unseen hands. I fell backward onto the floor, my eyes wide with terror as I saw a deathly pale face emerge from the darkness. Its eyes empty sockets, its mouth stretched into a grotesque smile. The morgue door slammed shut. The lights flickered violently. Whispers echoed from all around, "You have released me, now it's your turn." I don't remember how I escaped from there. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying in the hospital corridor, my body ice cold and trembling uncontrollably. But the cabinet, it was no longer in the morgue. No one in the hospital remembered it, as if it had never existed. I quit my job the very next day, but the nightmares never left me. Every night, I still feel an unseen gaze watching me, a cold breath on the back of my neck. And I know that wooden cabinet, wherever it is still out there. I took a job at the morgue of Blackwood Hospital on a frigid winter day. The hospital had stood for over a century, a sprawling Gothic structure with long, shadowy corridors and tall, narrow windows like deep, dark eyes. They said the place had once been a leper colony in the 19th century, where hundreds of patients had died in isolation. Later, it became a war hospital during World War I, where wounded soldiers groaned in agony, many never leaving its walls. Chilling tales about the hospital's morgue had been passed down through generations. Rumor had it that the spirits of the deceased patients couldn't move on, trapped by resentment and fear. Some nurses spoke of whispers in the night, of footsteps gliding down the corridors when no one was there. Others swore they had seen shadowy figures reflected in mirrors, only to find nothing but darkness when they turned around. My first shift started at midnight. The morgue was located in the basement, a space as cold as a tomb, the flickering fluorescent lights casting trembling patches of shadow on the walls. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant mixed with a subtle, putrid scent of decomposing meat. I felt a chill seeping through my clothes, as if unseen hands were caressing my skin. Things started subtly. Whispers would emanate from the dark corners, faint groans that could almost be mistaken for the wind whistling through the cracks in the doors. But then, the strange occurrences became more pronounced. A body drawer would suddenly slide open, even though I was certain I had closed it securely. Medical instruments would shift whenever my back was turned. Once, I saw a figure reflected in the glass door of the freezer, a gaunt man with deep-set, resentful eyes. But when I turned around, there was no one there. The haunting followed me into my dreams. I dreamt of being surrounded by patients in tattered hospital gowns, their skin pale, their eyes hollow. They whispered mournful words, fragmented sentences about betrayal, about the pain they had endured. When I woke up, I would find bruises on my arms, as if someone had gripped me tightly in the night. I decided to uncover the truth. I delved into the old records in the hospital archives and discovered a horrifying truth. It turned out that in the 1950s, a doctor named Edward Greaves had conducted inhumane experiments in the morgue. He used mentally ill patients to test methods of prolonging life, but instead of saving them, he subjected them to slow and agonizing deaths. Those people were never given proper burials, just dumped into the cold rooms of the morgue and forgotten. The moment I closed the file, a scream echoed from behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding. The lights went out. In the thick darkness, I could feel dozens of eyes staring at me. A cold breath touched the back of my neck, and then a voice whispered right in my ear, "You shouldn't have known this." I tried to run, but the morgue door slammed shut. Unseen hands grabbed me, pulling me into the darkness. I felt my body being squeezed as if hundreds of souls were trying to pierce my flesh, pouring their pain and resentment into me. Screams echoed in my head, a searing pain shooting through every cell of my body. Then, just when I thought I was fading into eternal darkness, I suddenly found myself lying on the cold floor outside the hospital corridor. But I could no longer feel my body. Nurses rushed past me, but no one saw me. I screamed, but no one heard me. I tried to touch someone, but my hand passed right through them like smoke. I had become a part of this morgue, a wandering ghost trapped between the living and the dead, along with the other tormented souls. And I knew I wouldn't be the last. Blackwood Hospital remains open. Patients continue to come and go. And those who work in the morgue never truly leave.